Okay, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt, our consultant, and let him begin to direct us through the meeting tonight. I want to note that we do have several maps that meet the requirements of the, in terms of equal population distribution, preserving communities of interest, and creating zones that are representing the population. And so there are some options for us. And Matt, why don't you start taking us through your comments?
Are you all okay if I take off my mask from up here? Okay, I think it'd be easier for you all to hear me if that's the case, and it won't mess up the microphone. So, Mr. Chairman, with your permission, a couple things. I do this all over the state, and I was telling Cindy before this meeting, I mean, the handouts that you all are providing the members of the public are awesome, right? I mean, I know, and I hope people don't take that for granted, but I mean, that's some really good stuff that doesn't happen in a lot of other jurisdictions. So I just want to call that out as a cool way to be able to handle this, because as we talked about, I know I was there for one meeting, and then my colleague Eddie came, and then I'm happy to be back for this one, but openness and transparency is the way to do this, right? That's just the way to do business. It's the way to live, and it makes for a better process. So, in front of you, you have several different maps that are in there. There were 2 public submissions, but I don't want to speak for the people who submitted it, but I think generally they like their second submission more than their first submission, so they're nodding, so I assume Angel's good with that. But so you have maps to consider, and I guess today, I know that Eddie went through them with you last time, but I would ask you to consider this, because this is really when you get into more of the subjective nature of redistricting. And what I mean by that is all of these maps meet the population equality standard, right? So they're all there in terms of where they could possibly be. Nobody suggested a map where you have 100 people in one district and 10,000 in another where the population is really off. There is some, and we've highlighted for you, and I think one of the proponents of the maps asked for basically a spreadsheet that talks about how and we really looked at the Hispanic CVAT number, which is critical for analysis under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, and that's why we highlighted. It's not that we are favoring one ethnicity over another, a race over another, but the reality is here in this area, any Voting Rights Act concerns are going to involve the Latino community. That's just what it is. You can look at the numbers for the Asian population and the African American population, but none of those numbers are to such a high degree that they're going to be impacted significantly for the Voting Rights Act. But then, as we talked about the first time we met, then you really start talking about what communities of interest are. And communities of interest, as I mentioned to you before, are really all things to all people, right? And there's different values that people place on different things. Some people might value city boundaries or school district boundaries or whatever it is that you might value. You might value healthcare facilities, making sure they're in different districts, whatever those are. I think, and I don't want to get outside of my lane because I'm not your attorney, but I do think that the board would be strongly advised to adopt at least 2 districts that have at least 2 districts, the Latino CVAT being over 50%. I would recommend that to you, and you can choose to ignore that if you have other reasons to go do that, but that would be a strong suggestion in terms of the way that lays out. You have some other options here with a 3rd district that either could be somewhere near 50% or just short of it or whatever. And I would remind the board, we talked about this before, and it's important for just a quick summary. On population equality, we look at every living heartbeat, right? Every person counts, whether they're an infant or 90 years old or whatever, whether they're a citizen, non-citizen, everyone counts. The only exception to that is, as I mentioned to you before, is under the statewide database where we got these numbers, we take out and remove anyone who was, if you had a state correctional facility, those people are zeroed out, and then anyone from the boundaries of your district that is in a state correctional facility someplace else, they are reapportioned back into your area with the best data available for those people. And that's done by the statewide database. That's not done by my shop. And so, for example, if somebody just lived on 1st Street in Visalia, they actually get randomly assigned to some census block along 1st Street in Visalia. If all we know about that person is they live in Visalia, they get randomly assigned in Visalia.
Right?
What's that?
That person is incarcerated that you're discussing.
Yes, that person who's incarcerated, and they could be in Pelican Bay or in Imperial County or wherever, but if their last known address was here within your district, they're going to be randomly assigned here. We're talking about a few hundred people, is my guess, throughout the entire state. I don't know exactly what the number is, but that's why sometimes people say, Matt, your numbers are off, you're missing 200 people, or you've added 200 people, or actually in some cases where they have correctional facilities, might be missing 3,000 people, right? But that's the reason for the difference, but we have to use, for population equality, the adjusted population given to us by the statewide database, and the numbers you see reflect that. So that's one thing. When we talk about the Voting Rights Act, it's a totally different set, and that's why we call it CVAP, Citizens Voting Age Population. So the only people counted under that, and it's a survey. So, and this is why I'm telling you all this, Citizens Voting Age Population is determined by the American Community Survey. The census is a counting where they enumerate every person and every correctional person, the correctional thing I told you about, and counts them and locates them. For the American Community Survey, instead, it was a survey done in 2019, and it's your best estimate, and it's a survey. It's not counting every person. They do, the Census Bureau gets this information. It's not, once again, coming from my shop, and they're estimating where it is. And so there has been a lot of litigation in the past over what is the number, because it's a sampling. And so when you start talking about is 48% has a pretty good chance of actually having more than 50% Latino CVAP, because it's a survey, right? So there's some error there. And so oftentimes people say, well, if you put it right at 50%, or you put it at, there's been litigation over the idea that it could be maybe even 47%, and we could call that a Latino majority CVAP district, because it's a survey. It's not 100% accurate. So when you look at my numbers, you say, well, Matt, you and Eddie and Fabian say it's 32.08%. That's not an enumeration like it is the census. When I count the bodies for the population equality, I'm very certain about what those are. When these CVAP numbers, which is the industry standard on how you look at Voting Rights Act information, so it's not new to you all here, those numbers are not as accurate normally as they would be otherwise. There's some play in those. And then once again, back to communities of interest. It is whatever this community values and you decide you value. And that can be neighborhoods, that can be other groups that don't meet the threshold for 50% of a CVAP district, where you might say, well, there's an Asian community there, and we want to keep that together. That's also a possibility to be able to do that. So, Mr. Chair, those are kind of my opening comments. I'm happy to go through all the different maps for you if you like, or I'm happy to answer questions. Hopefully you found the Google Mapping tool to be helpful to you as you looked at the maps, to be able to zero in on the areas that you want. We found that people have really liked that, to be able to really drill down on where their favorite KFC is, or their kid's school, or wherever they want to look at. It answers a lot of questions when people say, oh, I don't know which side of the street this is on, because you can't really see those on the PDF. But on the Google Mapping tool, you can really tell that quite well.
Cindy's bringing up the issue of that Eddie didn't have a really good answer for, is if we end up with final maps that have more than one current board member sitting in it, what happens in those kinds of, I mean, I have a suspicion I know what happens.
Okay. So I do know the answer to this. So, and Eddie's the data guy, so I wouldn't be surprised by that. So he could.
He was very good, by the way.
Oh.
Answered a lot of our questions, but I think this is maybe one area where
he's a really good guy, but he's a data guy, right? He could talk to you for hours about the data, and you would never want that, nor would any of us. But that's the way it would go. But in answer to your question, if there are, can I pick on you since you're sitting right here in front? If we both live in the same district, right? And the other thing you all have to decide, in addition to the maps, we need to decide what numbers you want to give to them, and how many of you are, your term ends at the end of this year. Is it 2 or 3? 2. So 2 districts are going to need to be assigned, of the 5, to be assigned to be up for election in 2022. And yet just yesterday I was challenged to say, well, we want to do 3. Well, then you'd have 6 members of your board. You can't do that, right? So because only 2 of you are your term ends, and so you have to select 2 of the districts of the 5 to be up this next time. So if we pick 2, and so if she and I are living in the same district, and we were both up at the end of this year, we would have to run against each other, or not. One of us could pass, or maybe we both don't run, and we can go do whatever. But here's the complication.
that you're both in the same district, though?
We're both in the same district, and we're both up in 2022. So that's one potential option. One potential option is we get assigned to a district that you all decide is up in 2022, but she's not up until 2024, and I'm up in 2022. So I'd say, well, I'm going to run. Of course I'm going to run. But she says, well, then If I wait till 2024, then I won't have a seat to run in because you'll be sitting in it. And I don't like that. And so her option would be, well, Matt, I think you'd be a horrible hospital director, so I'm going to run against you. And if she beat me, then she would resign her previous seat, take this one, and then the board would have to appoint her replacement because she just resigned from a seat that still has 2 years left. Yes?
Okay, so the timing is interesting here. So she would not have to resign to file her candidacy.
She could, but she doesn't have to.
Okay.
Because if I lose, I would still finish the 2 years of
That's
my
right.
term.
Okay.
And nothing that we do here, for those of the other 3 of you whose terms are up in 2024, nothing we do here in redistricting can impact your term. So no matter what lines we draw, you're duly elected, you get to stay for your entire 4-year term. It's just what you would do in 2024 when that's up, or if you were to decide to run early in a 2022 seat like the example I just gave here. Yes, sir.
So if I'm in a district and 2 events, another board member winds up in that district with me as a result of this, I'm up in 2024.
That's right.
So my choice is that I either have to run in 2022 against the other board member, or to retain to
You could stick around in your current seat till 2024, but then you wouldn't have a seat to run for at that time.
I would just be done in 2024.
You would be done in 2024.
To that vacant zone.
And you could always take that option. That's
Or the other issue is the individual who's in that zone whose term is up could also choose not to run, and then it leaves everything as it is.
that's true as well. So those.
I thought the one unanswered question, because I think we understood even from Eddie, is that, let's say Mike and Dave, right now they're in separate zones, but once we redraw the lines, they find themselves both in the same zone. Dave's up in 22, Mike's up in 24. So if Dave runs and Mike doesn't run against him, Mike stays on the board until 2024.
That's right.
But then at the end of it, he's off the board.
That's right.
Period. And then at that point, I guess we still have this vacant zone. Even though Mike doesn't live in it, we still have a 5-member board until Mike's term is up in 2024. But once he's up in 2024, he now lives in a zone that Dave got elected 2 years ago, so it's 2 years to go. How do you fill that empty zone?
There's just an election.
They run.
Special?
No.
No. So in 2024, there's an open seat, and somebody, for example, just because it's up here, the yellow seat happens to be the open one, then people run and file for run in the yellow seat, and they run, and somebody wins, and they slide in and take that seat. So the board would continue to have 5 people.
Okay, I got that. So now, different scenario, Mike and Dave, again, are in the same zone. Mike decides to run against Dave, and he beats Dave. So Dave's now off the board as his term's up. Mike is now on the board until 2026, no longer 2024, but we have an empty zone.
And that's where whatever your succession plan is that exists right now, I would assume it's board appoints a replacement. And here's the crazy part. And it's for the old district. It's not the new one, right? But
you don't hold an election in that vacant one.
well, unless your bylaws require a special election, but I don't think they do. They probably are board replacement. And that's the good way of looking at it, which is the glass half full way. I got in trouble yesterday because I suggested that, well, if you got recalled, it would be in the old election. I don't like the idea of being recalled. Well, I get that. But anyway, if a board member who was up in 2024 were to somehow be recalled between then and now, it would be under their old district boundaries, not the new boundaries, just to be clear. So you had the glass half full, mine was the glass half empty.
Okay, so that's talking about things from the trustee's perspective. Now, what about from the constituent's perspective? Let's say there is, because we got maybe it's not as crucial at the hospital district level as it is at congressional level, but we got this question quite a bit. A constituent who ends up in a zone that is vacant in the new scenario, who do they go to for representation?
So, did everyone hear that question? It's a great question, and it comes up, it is a problem or an issue with any time you have staggered boards. So it's the acceleration or deferment, right? And so the acceleration is especially since you all haven't redistricted in a while, you're going to see some major changes, right? That's just the nature of it because you're in a fast-growing area and that's going to happen. So it's going to be even more pronounced because you're having 30 years worth of population shift all at once here. And so there will be some areas that will technically people say, well, that's, I'm being deferred, meaning that I elected somebody in 2020 and I'm not going to have a chance to vote again until potentially 2026, which could happen. There's also people who are going to be able to voted in 2020 and are going to vote in 2022 and they get back on the schedule as they match that up. Eventually it corrects itself, but this is an issue for every board of supervisors in California that has staggered election, school boards, state senate, not state assembly because it's 80 seats every time. Congress, it isn't an issue because the whole state votes every 2 years. But for state senate, it is an issue. And there's no other way not to have acceleration or deferment of those happens. It just is going to happen because you can't, the only way you could prevent that would be to only have the seats exchange population that were up in each cycle. So you just move the boundaries between them. But then in terms of who serves people, that's a board governance decision, right? So some boards are very territorial. This is my district, you stay out of my area, this is mine, don't come into my area. I was on a board of supervisors that was somewhat like that. The Davis supervisors didn't want anyone from Woodland coming into their Davis territory. My position was exactly the opposite. If you'd like to help one of my constituents, please do. I'm happy to have your help. They would love to have your help. I'll thank you for it. But they viewed it very differently. So that's a board governance issue, and it's for supervisors in particular who tend to have in larger counties. I encourage them to work out whatever their protocols are for governance. And so if somebody calls and I'm from another district, do you help them or handle their inquiry, or do you pass it on to your colleague? That's an issue up to you. But in the end, your board as a whole, you're elected from that area, you still have an obligation to the entire district. Your district isn't, you're elected from an area, but you have an obligation to the district as a whole, and you can figure out how you want to handle those constituent issues, but that's not a redistricting issue. I view that as a board governance issue in terms of how you handle those constituent affairs.
More like a cultural. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you know, if my Davis colleagues was here, they would say, you know, please stay out of Davis, Matt, you know, leave us alone. And you know, I would say, well, please help my folks. So however they want to view that.
It's less of an impact on a board that appoints a replacement rather than have to wait for, like we're doing with Nunes, wait for a special election.
Yeah, that's a little bit different scenario, yeah.
And would that, because as you say, after 30 years, it's going to be a radically different map.
Mm-hmm.
So the odds that there is going to be a vacant district are higher than normal. But if there is a vacant district, then would that be taken into consideration in determining, when the board determines the sequencing of the election?
Well, the only reason that it would be vacant is because it would be deferred until 2026. So if it's up in 2022, that's not the issue. And so the board could, as a policy matter, consider the idea that, okay, no current board member lives in that seat, so we would like that one up in 2022. That would be an option for them to consider, but that's a policy choice for the board. One of many things to weigh.
Thank you.
Okay, part of what I'd like to hear with you tonight is have board members ask questions and react to maps and just have some comments and some dialogue as we go along. We've got one more meeting after this one. We did get a new map today, and I don't know if the one that's up there, that looks like the new one that we got today.
No,
No, sorry, that's number one.
No.
But
So I'm just...
to me on that kind of a page, I can't tell the difference.
Yeah.
Anyway, we did get a new map, and Matt, you might want to just talk briefly about that, and then I'd like to open it up to the board to make any comments or...
So map number 6, I don't think you all have it there, but Eddie, what's that?
Yeah, we have it.
They have it? Okay. So map number 6 is Eddie took his thoughts that he came away from your last meeting and looked at number 6, and he said they might want to consider this. Map number 6 is Eddie's creation, from what he heard last time, is my understanding. I was not here, so.
One thing I would like to ask is that we had this kind of a sheet prepared. I think Angel's the one who put together this sheet. I'd like that same data compiled for map 6, so we have a full and honest comparison between all of the maps for us to look at. And then with that, I'll be quiet and open it up to the board and anybody who'd like to make a comment.
I've got a question. So we have 6 maps plus a citizen-generated map.
Yes.
And so as we look at these, my impression is that the maps that have been prepared by your firm and the map that Angel submitted all meet the minimum requirements of the law. I'm trying to understand the range of options here. I see that some of these are real problematic. I look at map 4 with 3 HCVAP zones over 50%, but they're slightly over. And you mentioned there's a margin of error here that there's no guarantee that all those 3, 1, 2, and 3 on map 4 are really over 50%. Some could be over, some could be less. And so, I'm trying to understand as I look at these, is there a comfort level here that says, well, really we are splitting hairs at the end here, trying to understand which map to decide on, because they all meet the letter of the law. So we're now here trying to understand the nuances and determining which one we think best serves the community.
So, kind of a long response that touches on several different things. Of the maps you have on the sheet here, the only one that truly makes me feel uncomfortable is map 1. Map 1 is uncomfortable because I would argue that giving the board several other options to choose from, the problem with map 1 is that it's potentially packing Latinos into one district where the number is 60%, when we clearly are demonstrating to you options that would give you the option of drawing at least 2 Latino CVAP districts that are over 50% when you have one number that's 60. But the attempt of the exercise in that map was to basically create more influence districts. But I don't think you can give up influence to say, well, we're creating 3 influence districts and avoid the opportunity to create another majority district. And so that's the one that, but other than that, generally, there will be people that will argue that the Latino CVAP number would be better if it was 53, 54, 56. That's a little bit of a subjective analysis, and it really needs to be based on more data than just that, because it differs by different parts of the state. We don't exactly know that here. But I would agree with your overall statement that generally, beyond, other than map 1, all these other maps would be considered to be very viable by your board.
So is there a percentage of error one way or another that's considered acceptable? I mean, if you have a deviation of 2% or 1.5% or whatever it is there something that gives you a confidence factor, I think Mike called it, or whatever, relative to the CVAP number, since it's not a specific number?
Well, if you think the mean is 50%, this is truly me speaking off the top of my head, but I would guess that the standard deviation for something like that would be 2 or 3 points one way or the other. So you'd want to be, to have a district to say, this is a really good Latino district, it's got to be at least 47%. But oftentimes, I would say that that's really in isolation when you don't have the option of, if you just say, well, we drew this district, we did the best we could, it's the only one in this whole sea of another type of people, but we can get this one at 47%, and that's the highest we can get it, you would say, well, you should try to do that. That's not the case here. You have districts that are next to it that are 50%, 51%, whatever else. It's not in isolation. And so, but I would say that 47% or higher is generally, 48% is actually a pretty good district, but if you can get to 50, you want to get to 50.
And we have, ma'am, you have a question?
Yes, I do. I apologize, I didn't get here in time for public comment. Lucia Vasquez.
Public comment is the whole meeting.
Right,
You're
okay. So, first of all, thank you for your transparency, for putting dates where the public can come, for listening, for making phone options available, and for live streaming. Because those are huge things that show that you really do want to listen, so thank you for that. For those of you who don't know me, I sat on the Visalia School District for 9 years, so I understand where you're sitting. And also, I worked with the county when they did the county commission redistricting to do their outreach, so I've become a nerd with some of these other people. My big
No, a great person, not nerd, great person, a better person.
That you're talking about 50%, you're talking about the VRA, and we don't want to get sued and want to go 50%. But if you really want to look at the spirit and the letter of the law, the spirit of the law as well, 50% is just a number. The idea that you can't get that close. This is why I had tried by email and by Facebook last time to ask if the board would consider making a bar. The county went to 55%, that they committed to 2 VRA districts that were at least 55%, because as your consultant very well has been explaining, you have the demographic or the basic population, then you have what you're looking at is the CBAP, which shows you the potential of voters, of age voters. But there's also a thing called voter propensity. To give you an example, there was a big talk about Tulare, and I'm just using that as an example, where you have the north side, where they have a man-made lake and very expensive homes, and then you have a really poor side. At the top part, you have 80% voter propensity. At the bottom part, you have 34 to 43% voter propensity. So you can put them there, and the numbers may be there for your Hispanics to see that, but you're really not following the spirit of the law, which is we want representation for those people that traditionally have not been represented, and those 4 populations that by law are protected. So I would ask the board to really consider, if you want to do 2 Latino CDAPs, then consider 2 effective Latino CDAPs, and consider at least 53%. I would go 57%. You've got the room to move. You're changing the maps dramatically, and again, the fact that you're following the rules and you're really considering that incumbency is not a factor, which again, thank you very much, because those are hard decisions, because that's the law. And doesn't mean people follow them, but thank you. So that would be my, thank you.
So I have a question, maybe. So you're saying 2 at 55 is better than 3 at 50?
Yes.
Because you're
I
going
would
to have a
feel
chance to be able to elect someone. I lost my election by eight
It
votes
seems like
last
you might be able
time.
to elect 3, though.
At 47%, if you look at the vote, you're not even considered voter propensity, it's really not likely. It took the commissioners that many years at 61% to finally to get a Latino for the first time ever. First Latino ever.
How do you measure voter propensity?
So here's the issue is that may be right? But we haven't, that's on a bunch of facts that basically aren't in evidence here. I mean, we in terms of what we know, we haven't done a racially polarized voting analysis to go through this process. That could be right, but that is a whole separate process and very different. And so that's why I believe that in terms of the decision this board needs to make, I mean, if 55% were a magic number, we have in this whole plan, if they have one that's really close in the public map submission 2 at 54.9, but we only have 2 districts in this whole thing that meet that standard of 55%. So, and that's where I think you get into more of a subjective analysis based on the evidence that we have today. And I don't know that there's any right answer or wrong answer. That's a question for the board.
Yeah, I would just like to comment off of what Dr. Vasquez said, as far as we can look at numbers, but it's more of these community interests that we're supposed to look over. And just with like map 6, last time we said we wanted to keep Goshen and Ivanhoe as a whole community, and map 6 ends up splitting Ivanhoe, where the railroad tracks goes Family Dollar going towards Woodlake. So map 6 didn't keep Ivanhoe whole, and we just really need to keep in mind these community of interest, like Dr. Vasquez mentioned.
And so I'm not disagreeing, I'm just trying to give the other deal. And then the other thing is that, and no community ever wants to hear this, but there's also, well, there's a couple that argued it during the state redistricting process where they said, we're not large enough to control a district. We'd rather have 2 members represent. So we have, we're a small community and we're going to get, if we could have 2 state senators actually represent us, we actually think that would be an advantage. Now, most communities don't argue that. They're like, oh, we all want to be together, right? And so, but once again, there's no way to draw these maps that doesn't split some community in your district. I mean, Visalia simply is too large, right? Obviously, that gets split. It's a question of what else you have to split, because we have to draw lines somewhere. And there's always a story after redistricting. We're like, we live on the opposite side of the street, and we're neighbors, but we're in different districts, whether it be assembly or school district or whatever. It happens because we're drawing lines on streets. That's generally what we use.
Okay. Money?
Oh, okay. You mentioned the concept of packing, but there's a complementary concept called cracking, and that's where you draw the lines with the effect of diluting a community such that they are unable to elect representatives of their choice. So as I was going over these, there was one map that I thought did that, unfortunately. I think it was map number 4.
Where you have 3 that are right over 50?
Yeah, that had, yes, just barely over 50, which may look like it makes the letter of the law, but the spirit, it renders those districts ineffective for Latino voters. And one thing I've noticed, I know.
And how is that? I'm just wondering, how does that?
Map number 4, for instance, has 3 districts that are barely over 50 HCDAP.
Oh, okay.
But our band of nerds knew nothing about redistricting when we started back in May with on this journey, or April. But one thing, when we started, we thought it was about voters, but what we've learned is that it's also about candidates. Candidates who think that they don't have a chance won't run. People say, well, why doesn't the Latino community get out and vote? Why is the propensity so low? Well, it might be that they don't see the point. They haven't been able to elect people that they have voted for in the past, and candidates don't emerge that are in their community. So it's a little bit of a chicken and an egg situation.
Right.
So we at the League of Women Voters want as much civic engagement as possible. And that's why we've paid attention to redistricting.
Okay.
So to answer your
But is
question,
it cracking or is it the?
this scenario number 4 could be considered cracking in that it is diluting the HCDAP numbers to the point where they're ineffective. The word is effective.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair? So I don't actually agree with that. I don't agree with that because that could be true, but we don't know what that threshold is because we don't have the data to be able to determine that if that's true in the districts the way they're drawn. It's totally different throughout the state. There's different standards in different parts of the state. That may be true, but we don't know that. And it takes a whole different set of analysis to be able to do that that's not being done in this case to determine what that threshold is. And in some cases in the state, I will admit, it may need to be 55, 56%. In other cases, 50% is fine. I don't know that in terms of what the standard would need to be for these hospital districts, but that could be true, but we don't know that for sure. And that's why I think it's a subjective analysis for the board to determine.
Yeah. So after I analyzed all the maps, in all honesty and sincerity, and I know this might sound biased, but I would definitely go with public number 2. The public submission that we have heard from the Board of Supervisors telling us that they want Goshen and want Goshen together, right? That map 6, Ivanhoe is divided and it's not going to give the effectiveness that it's looking for. And this is only going based on communities of interest. This isn't, I'm not getting into, voting for propensity or anything like that. So when this map was drawn, like I mentioned last time around, and this map was drawn based on communities of interest and people telling us, hey, we want to stay together. Going to the Visalia City Council meetings and telling us, hey, we want to be here. Going to the Board of Supervisors and then telling us, we belong together, we're one community. This is why, we drew Zone 1, which is 62%. And when you put voting for propensity in it, and like Matt said, we don't have that data right here, right now, but if we were to add that data, the 61%, it would drop to like 58, 57%, because let's remember, yes, Latinos are being counted, but not all of them can vote, right? Not all of them are citizens, right? Some of them are the first time that they're immigrants, like my parents. I'm an immigrant, So that's, it's a high number, but when it comes to voting, it's not going to be effective if you choose map number 4, where it's HCBAP 51%, and then when you put voting propensity in there, it's 47% or 43%. Then even though they are a protected class, they won't be able to choose a candidate of their choice. So I mean, like I said, it sounds like because I'm one of the authors of the map, but I definitely think that the best option for Kaweah Health is definitely public option number 2. And this is a great analysis that they did. So they put all of them together so you can compare and contrast all the numbers and everything. The other thing that I would want to add is I would definitely suggest and make the statement that public submission number 2, or map number 2, should be the basis of the map that you guys are moving forward to. I think that this map can be adopted and say, hey, we like map number 2, but I'd rather move, zone 1, 2 streets over or 1 street over, like they've done elsewhere, like the Board of Supervisors. And I keep referring to the Board of Supervisors because I attended all those meetings and had perfect attendance there.
Almost 2 for 2, man.
Yeah, that's it. So I definitely would encourage that, like moving forward. I mean, the maps
said
are
map 2 when you're saying public submission number 2, right?
Yeah, well, public submission number 2. That's what I'm referring to. Not map 2, but public submission number 2 would be definitely that. And I think that there was a public comment on Facebook that said, hey, we support public submission number 2, and people that live in Visalia and wrote their address on there. So it's not just something that I'm making up. So I believe.
Yeah, we did get
elaborate on that.
an email comment from an individual today supporting public submission number 2. Right.
See, so it's not something that I'm making up. It's
Right, no.
absolutely true.
No, I understand your integrity and all the rest of it. Okay, any other comments or questions from anybody? Anything we need to talk about? Any questions for Matt?
Yeah, I would just like to follow up going off of what Angel said, making public map number 2 baseline. And Garth pointed out earlier to me that map number 5, done by your group, is similar to public map number 2. When making map 5, did you reflect back on public map 2, or how did you come to that one?
No, I don't. I think map 5 was prepared before. I think these maps were prepared before Angel worked with Fabian on my team. So
So only one?
6 was.
6 was the late addition.
I think map 5 came after Angel. I think it almost.
Oh, did it? Okay.
Teed off what he just
Okay.
recommended, that we started with Angel's map and said,
Okay.
what if we moved a little bit around it?
Okay, I could be wrong about that.
Yeah.
But I did want to say one thing. So Eddie believes that Goshen is split in your public submission number 2. So he thinks it's a census designated place and it cuts a little bit. So if we are going to use census number 2, we'll want to fix that. Because some of the other communities are undefinable, but Goshen is actually a census designated place, so it's clearly defined, and Eddie believes there's a slice cut off of it.
Which one?
In public submission number 2, that Goshen, I was actually trying to...
Zone 3 is the north half, and then, or?
At some point, wherever, I don't know exactly where the census designated place is for this, but at some point it cuts for Goshen. There's a little piece of it that's in the yellow there somewhere.
But see, that's why I mean, like, use public submission number 2, right? And they just adjusted the lines.
It seems like at some point we have to do something like that, because if we just continue to analyze 7 different maps, we're all gonna come with 5 different votes. And so it's, I don't know what the best way for us to have a working session is, right? Because we can say, we like this, we don't like this, but we still haven't narrowed it down. And so it seems like the best way for us to move forward is to continue to have these, but then start striking some of them from the ones that we're looking at.
I've already heard through a process of elimination, and I agree with Matt. Map 1, I think, should be discarded, and I think you should consider discarding map 4 as well, because of the tracking concern, the fact that we have 3 Hispanic CVAPs that are just barely at 50%. I think if your 3 objectives are really to achieve the population distribution and the deviation to stay within that, which I think all the maps do that, and then you're also very concerned about preserving the communities of interest, and then you also want to have at least 2 Hispanic CVAPs that are more than just right at the edge of that 50%. So if those are your 3 primary objectives, I think you would throw out map 1 and map 4.
I'd like to propose, I think Gary's right that map 1 and map 4 need to be eliminated.
Map 2 probably as well.
Yes.
There's none that are above 50.5%.
I would agree with that, and that's a good comment. Map 3, we have 2, zone 4 and zone 5 that have a HCVAP over 50%. The zone 5 is just barely over. And to me, with the margin of error, I don't see that map as being appropriate. And map 6, splitting Ivanhoe is problematic. In my mind, my opinion only, public map 2 should be considered, and public map and map 5 should be considered.
I agree with you, Mike, that makes no sense.
Yeah, I agree. 5 and 2 should, public number 2 should be, are the 2 that make the most sense potentially.
I'm sorry, which 2?
Public map 2 and map 5.
Can I ask what the deviation is on the newest map? I have the deviations, they're not on, for some reason the deviations are here, but we can fill them in, but I don't have the deviations for map 6.
So District 1 is 0.17% under. District 2 is 0.02% over. District 3 is 0.74% over. District 4 is 0.78% over. And District 5 is 1.36% under. So that total deviation for that plan is like 2.5%.
So it's 2.14?
Seems about right. But these are all pretty tight.
Okay.
Yeah, I think those are the districts, yeah, I guess that might be.
I'm sorry, did I not give you good information?
No, I was looking at the population equality that she had, that's 2.9 in public submission 2, and then I thought you were going map 1, map 2, map 3, map 4.
Oh, would you like me to do them again?
Well, I think
Not
it's the whole map, not the different zones.
Yeah.
Because there's a metric on this deal that says population equality, and public map submission 2 is the only one with a number.
Oh, I see. We didn't fill that in.
But Matt, when Eddie was here,
Mhm.
maps 1 through 5,
I think they're-
produced by you, have 0 aggregate.
I think
deviation.
that's the
Every one of them was perfect deviation. Angel's map is only 2.9, so that's clearly within the.
These are all good, yeah.
And I think map 6 is clearly within it as well. So every single map
We're solid.
achieves the deviation.
It's right. But,
Is 2.9 something to worry, the population deviation?
no, that's solid. You have 10, and you want to have a really good reason at 10, right? You have to have, like, I think I gave you the example of the Butte fire being in Paradise being a good reason, because they have the community just get devastated. Anything under 5 is wonderful, and you're under 3 on all of these, and so I think you're solid. So 2.9 is totally good to go.
Map 5, I show a 6.32% deviation.
.39 in number 1, number 2, under 2.99, so you may end up being right. 3, deviation 3.33, so yeah, she's probably right. But still, it's still comfortably under 10. I still wouldn't have a problem with a 6% deviation. It's
Okay.
still not a major concern.
But it's the highest deviation.
Yes, but it's still, that's not an overwhelming number.
What was that number again? 6?
6.32.
Thank you so much.
Okay, any other comments from anyone, public or board? Staff? Mark?
Sorry, Dave, to interrupt you, going back to scenario 5, the deviation.
I'm
You have-
sorry, Gary, which one?
Scenario 5, maybe I'm just doing this wrong, but I thought you were supposed to like add up all the deviations together. So you got a positive 1.39, a positive 3.33, which adds up to a positive 4.72.
So-
But then the 3 negatives add up to a negative 4.71.
No, sir. So it's always going to be 0 because we always have the population. It's the spread between the smallest number and the largest number. So they're always going to be 0. So that's why Eddie was so mathematically perfect at 0. So he does deserve credit, but not for that, because the math just works out that way, right? It's if you're under someplace, you're over the other place, it all balances out.
But when you measure against this 10% threshold, how do you calculate that?
So what's the lowest number? So the lowest deviation under?
For example, the highest is 3.33, and then you go to zone 2 is minus 2.99, so it's the total absolute number
The total variance
Of those two.
of the largest and the smallest.
So you're essentially at 6.3.
That's right. Which is still fine.
Okay.
It's better than 75.2.
It is better than 75.2. Yep, that's definitely true. That's the math just kind of proves that out, right?
Okay, anything else for good of the order? Any comment, anybody? Yes?
Yeah, so you had some comments about map 2 and map 5. Are you guys going to make any decisions about voting them down, or are you just going to have the discussion? Or it would be nice for the community to know that you're moving forward and you're just looking at a couple if the rest of you are there. It would be nice to-
Well, I'm personally okay with eliminating 1 through 4. I don't know enough about 6 yet with the expanded analysis of it.
Yes.
But I'm personally okay with leaving it at public map 2, map 5, and then maybe 6, depending on what the rest of the form looks like in terms of the other comparable criteria. I don't know. I can hear from my
And
fellow board members.
before you get too far into that discussion, I just want to remind you that the agenda tonight is for discussion. It's a work session. There isn't any action that's contemplated. certainly the board can come to some consensus, say that they intend to focus on particular maps, not maps, and invite public comments and move forward in that way. We don't
Can we
have-
tell Matt not to worry about the other ones and take them away from his presentation?
No.
Not really.
Okay.
I don't want you to inadvertently get in a situation where you're taking action when we haven't put action on the agenda
Right.
tonight.
But you mentioned, Michelle, we could ask for consensus
Correct.
on the map, so should we,
I think just as Dave was suggesting, just going down the line, getting feedback from you all.
I would agree with Dave that we should take out map 1 through 4, map 1 through map 4, and the public map 2 on the table, map 5 on the table, and map 6 on the table.
And Lynn, how are you doing? We're looking for a consensus, if that's something you're comfortable with.
Well, I'm probably comfortable with it. I need to think about it a little bit.
I'm comfortable with that.
I'd probably have a pretty hard time, I'm comfortable with it as well, but I'd have a hard time splitting Ivanhoe in half. And so map 6 would be.
That's 6?
Map
Okay.
6 would be pretty tough for me to cut Ivanhoe in half.
I'm with Garth as well, I don't like map 6.
But we
Yeah, I
could
didn't
still
see
get more maps.
I said that.
We could still get more maps.
We
Absolutely.
We
So
absolutely could.
that's always one of the, it's like if you've been involved in planning commission comments ever, you have to take public comment till the very end, but and it sometimes gets really dicey. The tough part is that eventually we're going to have a public noticing requirement. We're going to need to post the maps beforehand. But if somebody walks in on the very last day and says, hey, please consider my map, we may not be able to publicly notice it to be able to consider it, even though we need to take it into consideration. The reality is you can't accept that map because it hasn't been noticed.
But if we set a date certain that for submission of those maps, for example, we've had a date certain but is that not something we can?
That's nice, but in the end, somebody can come in on the very last day and say, I want you to consider my map, and then we'd have to say, I would defer to council, but I would say, that's a very nice map, but unfortunately, board, you shouldn't, well, actually, county council would tell you, your council would tell you, that's a beautiful map, but just, you can't adopt that because we didn't notice it.
So Matt, the legal deadline for the board is April 17th, but they're intending to meet on April 13th and adopt a map to take action. So can maps still be submitted on the 14th through the 17th? Because it's still...
Well, no, not at that point, but
So if the board can pick a date
Yeah.
earlier than April 17th
Sure.
and said, this is the last...
well, the reality is if the noticing requirement is 7 days, the technical requirement, when's your next meeting again? The 13th, so the 6th, I'm going to get an email from your staff and they're going to say, we have maps or we don't have maps. I had a deadline today at 4 o'clock. Somebody submitted a map at 3:30, so we had to turn those around and post them.
After April 6th.
After April 6th, it'll be the criteria, the situation I just told you, which is that's a beautiful map, but we didn't post it in time for the public to consider it. Your map is basically invalid. We can't consider it.
Okay, I just would take it upon myself to suggest that, as I did before, we don't know enough about map 6 in terms of all of the comparative data to be able to compare it evenly or fairly or whatever. And if it splits Ivanhoe or whatever, that's certainly something we're not interested in. So I would still say that I'd look for the consensus that we could continue to talk about maps 2, 5, and 6 until we have more information about map 6.
Now, you mentioned that Goshen is you had a technical term. It doesn't.
Census designated place.
Right. Now, both public map 2 and I think map 5 both split Goshen.
Yeah, well, actually, that may be true.
All of the ones, actually, 2 through 4, minus 3, at least 4 of the maps split Goshen.
I guess the question, is that something that needs to be addressed, or is it something to be considered to be used?
Well, for map 2, I have a hard time thinking Goshen goes beyond that. My guess is Goshen's whole there. So it may not be listed, but I don't. If And my only example for that is that,
Public submission number 2?
no, that was just map 2. So this is the outline for public submission number 2. And what Eddie was telling me is the census designated place just goes a little bit outside the boundaries there. It's a small fix, but if we're going to keep Goshen whole, we should do that and make it right. But I have a hard time believing that this splits Goshen. I think Goshen's.
What about 5?
Oh, let me look at 5 here real quick. So that probably splits it as well because it's the same line as that's public submissions 2 is the exact same line.
Can you show map 6 so we can see how that is going to split? It's hard to tell by the map.
The blue, it's the blue and the green.
Yeah, that's the street where you're heading towards Woodley. and there's-
Over to the right?
To the right, to the right.
To the right?
Oh, blue and green over here. Got it. Oh.
Right there, right
So where's the split?
It's got to be in the little jog.
Scroll up.
Hold on. I'm going to try to get to the.
Is that 328 heading
That's
to,
not number 6.
yeah, that's 328 heading to Woodley.
Yeah.
So it can't split very much of it.
Oh, it doesn't.
Yeah, well, I switched it to the, I put it on satellite view. If you like number 6, it appears to me that there could be population adjustments to be able to keep Ivanhoe whole. If you generally like the outline of it. It can't split too much of it. It looks to me like it's almost entirely within the blue district there.
6 looks a lot like Angel's dimension, right?
Just tell you. So the differences are these areas. I've got the 2 maps, public submission number 2 and draft 6 on top of each other. A lot of them are very similar. It's
Okay, then, I don't want to make any consensus of my own on this. Do we want to consider, leave 6 on as an option?
I don't think we can take any action anyway.
Yeah, I know we can't, but we're looking for consensus on, and I'm suggesting we do 2, public map 2, map 5, and map 6, particularly since we don't have all the data on 6 that we can compare it fairly.
So I think really what you're doing is providing Matt some additional direction. If you all have an interest in getting more information on map 6, then he's got his marching orders and can do that. But if map 6 is out the window for you all, then you don't need to have him go through that exercise.
I'd personally like to have him go through the exercise.
Can you instruct the consultant to fix whatever split or seemingly split communities are on each map and try to address all the other criteria as well?
Sure. And actually, I'll communicate with Angel offline to make sure we fix the Goshen issue. I don't actually even know. That's Eddie's representation. I believe him. So we'll figure it out.
No, that's a good suggestion. I think.
But I won't change his map unless he agrees to change his map, right? So,
You can change the map.
what's that?
You can change the map.
Oh, okay. Well, it's your map.
But at some point, our concern has to be for the good of the district as a whole and not individual components. And I understand that we're interested in population numbers and so forth, but I still think we all represent the district as a whole.
So in preparation for the next meeting, if we go the way we're going right now, your council's right in terms of setting this thing up. But the other thing is, if that's going to be the last meeting on this, the other thing you need to consider is the sequencing of the elections. So if you take a look, we'll be sending the information. I'll be sending it to Cindy to forward it to you all. I hope you'll take some time to think then, okay, which, in addition to adopting whatever number map you decide, we need 2 of them, because 2 of you are up this next time, so 2 of your seats term out. Which 2 would be up in 2022? Because we will need to include that in the ordinance that you pass to be able to send that on to the county for them to do their job.
How do we have a conversation around that to get kind of on the same page or come to consensus around that?
Well, eventually, somebody's going to have to make a motion for a map, and the motion should probably include, I like map X, and I would like the blue and the green to be numbered 1 and 2, and those will be up in 2022, or however you want to do it, with the advice of council to be able to do that. But we need both of those things to be able to move on in this process, right? We can't have one without the other.
And is it most prudent to whoever might, if one of the people coming off that is up in 2022, that we assign it to that district? That would seem logical to me.
You could choose to do that.
You can't do that.
If
Why
some,
not? Because the districts are controlled. Who you assign has to live there.
Well, but if I happen to live in zone whatever, and we choose that, and I'm up in 2022, and we choose that one because it makes sense,
Yeah.
then that's all I'm asking.
Yeah, if you choose, you have to look at the zones, and you have to look at it honestly and say who lives where. And Lynn and I are the two that are up for election in 22, and it would logically be if
Whatever zone.
in whatever one of us, she's going to be, let's say, in zone 2, and I currently live in 4, but I'm going to end up somewhere else maybe. Then you still make 2 and 4 be the two that have to be a run for.
that decision is entirely up to you as a board, and we'll make that happen however you all decide to make it happen.
Okay. All right, anything else for the good of the order? Any other comments? I don't want to shut anybody out. I want everybody to have their chance to speak. And okay, with
So
that,
are we hashing all of that out next week, next meeting?
that's our only choice, is to hash it all out at the next meeting.
Okay.
It's going to be fun.
Which will be posted as an action.
It will be action.
Right.
I guess, taking your comment about 7-day noticing, I guess no changes to any maps can be made at the April 13 meeting, right?
So other than minor changes, pretty much no. It would have to be something pretty minor.
So,
If I had, for example, if for some reason there was a census block that was unassigned, I can't imagine somebody objecting to us assigning a census block on the last day. But we're not like we're moving people or anything. We're just, we left out a freeway overpass that needs to go into a district. So I don't think that'd be a problem.
We made the suggestion that Matt fix any split communities and do that now, submit the maps, and then whatever is submitted by the appropriate date between now and then, that becomes the map that we'll look at.
So how about this, Mr. Chairman? If we commit to the idea that we can make these adjustments by the end of this week, and then you can post them. They don't have to finally be posted for a little while, and that would give members of the community here and other places a chance to look at them. And then if people say, well, we don't like any of your maps and we'd like to submit one, that would give them time to do that or whatever. But if we commit to giving them to you by Friday or maybe Monday at the latest, then we can post them early. It would be actually we would just go ahead and post all of them, but with whatever adjustments, and my team will get with Angel to make whatever adjustments he might like to his map. Then you can have them all up there, and they can be up there in plenty of time for people to look at. There's no reason my team can't finish that. And then if people don't like them, they would have plenty of time to be able to submit their own. Does that work?
And the adjustment to be made is going to be to eliminate any split communities or to...
We're going to try, and that also would give you a chance to look at it and say, Matt, you connected a community, but you connected the wrong one. We wish you would have done this one over here, and we could create another map then to be able to do that. So.
will that include an update of this?
I guess so. I haven't done those in too many. That was a good suggestion by Angel, so maybe that's a good way to do that. So yes, I guess we can do that, and we would fill in the population deviation on the top too, which I just totally missed until you called my attention to it today. I just didn't even notice that there, so that's my fault.
I have one last question.
Sure.
So is the board going to is the final date to submit a map April 6th?
April 6th.
That's the last day?
That's the last day to submit. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Can I offer one comment? It would bother me if, we have public map 2 and we have map 5, in my opinion. I'm not thrilled about map 6, but if folks want to keep it in, I'm okay with that. But it would bother me that if we have maps that come back that have been adjusted, that make map 5 or map 2 less viable in terms of the CVAP, then that would be a concern to me. So can we leave them on the table as they are, but also folks want to see a version of it with tweaks done.
About 2A and 5A.
So what I would do is exactly right. We would do map 2 adjusted, map 5 adjusted. I believe that what council just told you is can't take any maps off the table today. They'll still be there. You can all just ignore them next time. None of these options will go away. You'll just be simply provided some potential other options with some attention to some communities where that's possible. In some places it may not be possible, and I'll just have to come to you and say, we just have to split this community, or we're going to split another community, so you can choose.
Matt, can you show them, so when we put map 5A on there, you can actually, just like he has here, you can overlay 2 maps.
Mhm.
So if you want to see what the changes were, you'll be able to select map public submission 2 and public submission 2A. It will overlay it so you can see what changes were made.
That's right.
Okay. Again, anything for the good of the order? Any comments from anyone? If not, then we're going to adjourn at 6:37. Thank you all.